Hey everybody, it's Patch. So after a couple of days of seeing the poll that I put up on Facebook on seeing what you guys wanted to watch, it seems that a lot of people want to see. Well, the people who voted wanted to see me do some video tutorials along with doing some cheap commissions. So I think I'm going to start small with one of my commissions, and I'm going to just do a headshot of a character. So right now, I'll just show you all the tools that I'm going to be using today a little by little. Obviously, I'm gonna be doing this one-handed, so it's gonna be kind of difficult to do it. But we're gonna see what happens and see how well I can do this for the first time around. So as you see right here, I'm using a normal sketch pad. Nothing comic based or professional grade. It's just a normal pad, plain blank pad. Uh, the size I'm using right now is 14 by 17 inches, so pretty big size. You know, pretty big pieces. I can easily fill up a lot of space with doing a simple headshot drawing. So the pencil I'm using is going to be a non-photo blue pencil. So these are pretty cool because when you draw onto it, and I'll show you while we go around. Um, you'll see that it's pretty simple stuff. It's pretty nice. It doesn't really have a whole lot of lines like a normal lead pencil does, or like a mechanical pencil does. So obviously need my sharpener. Keep my tip of that pretty sharpened, but not too crazy, because I find out with using these, you want them a little bit balder, so that way when you do make a mistake, and you'll see me make a couple mistakes while I'm drawing, that it's a lot easier to erase those mistakes and make them a little transparent with a bolder point rather than a sharpened one. Obviously, just an eraser, nothing too crazy. Artist eraser, greatest things you want to use when you're drawing. I'm not a big fan of using pink erasers just because it does leave that pink stain on them. So whenever you guys get into drawing or anything else, it's always good to find these. They come in, they're pretty fairly cheap. They come in like a pack of, in a pack of two or so for like $3 at the local craft store or whatnot. Or you can buy pencil sets with those in there with them, along with these little clay things too that are really great as well. They really pick up a lot of granite off the pencil lead, and it's really great stuff. So where I got all my stuff at is just at my local Michael's craft store. So nothing. They always have pretty good sales. I love going there because I always find everything I need. And the big reveal, the person I'm going to be drawing is this guy. I'm not doing one, obviously, for the record. I'm not doing a one-for-one changing of drawing of Spawn. Obviously, doing this cover, great cover, awesome read. What I'm doing is using this as a reference, more along the lines of not necessarily trying to do the same line work as Todd McFarlane or anything like that, but more along the lines of remembering how his costume looks at certain spots. So obviously his mask is pretty simple. It's basically like a version of Venom's mask with eyelids, pretty much. So that's how I usually look at it. It's pretty simple stuff, nothing too crazy. As I said, I'm using it as a reference, not so much along the lines of trying to mimic how he looks, but sometimes when you're doing a drawing, it's always better to keep the main things that make that character stand out. So like with me, I may do color with it and all this other stuff. I'm not too sure yet, but the one thing I'm gonna for sure make sure I keep on there is obviously his cape, along with the way his eyes look and the way his the outside of his eyelids look as well. So if I keep when you're drawing somebody, you always want to keep the main project that make that character stand out. So that way, even if you do your own interpretation of it, people know what you're looking at. So if you decide, let's say you decide to make like Superman, you make him like really super jacked or wear anything else, or you make his suit look a little more complex. As long as you keep the Superman shield on the front and keep the normal colors, everyone knows who they're looking at. They don't necessarily have to guess what they're looking. So with that being said, let me switch hands over, get everything ready to roll. As I said, it's not gonna be the best angle. This is my first time doing this way, one-handed. So yeah, little cap two to keep all my pencil shavings in there. The tracing paper, what it's always a good thing to do is, especially if you're drawing a bigger piece and some things are not coming up right, or looking right, it's always good to make at least a couple of different references of tracing and adjust the way you want them to look on there, and you'll actually see if something looks better in a different pose. And I'll show you what I mean with that in a little while. Not so much necessarily, obviously I'm just doing a headshot, but I'll show you what I mean when it comes to when I start doing the detail work and doing the lines and everything else. So when we get to that step, I'll let you know. All right, so enough of me talking. So what I normally like to do is I like to start out with basic lines. I don't go too crazy on them. I go pretty simple. Let me flip this around, get a better view. There we go. So started pretty simple with things. I always have a good idea of how I want the character to look within a few moments. And as I said before, when I did Domino, I usually have two different references on, well, two different ideas on how I want to make the character to look, just because if one doesn't start looking out right, I know I have a second plan to work on. So I started with the normal stuff, just doing basic, it's hard to see, I know, just doing basic organic lines and circles. You know, nothing too crazy. I don't go way too overboard with that. And I'll show you what I mean in a minute. So I'll grab my eraser and right about here, show you what I mean by it's always good to draw lightly with a ballpoint, because now basically that whole line's disappeared, which is nice. So, all right. Now, the first thing I usually start out with when I'm drawing anything, I always start with a head. A lot of artists will start out different ways. They'll keep a lot of flowing movements, but then again, too, a lot of artists also, let me get this line out of the way, have been drawing a lot longer than I have, and pros who I admire have at least about 20, 30 years on me more than I have, So I'm always learning more and learning different tricks from watching their videos to see how well they work. So, but a lot of them will 9 times out of 10 will easily start with the head first, because the head actually shows all the emotion and actions on what you're doing. And that's what you want to do, because wherever the head looks or towards to, the body follows. So once you have that idea where the head's going to be, the head position is, everything else comes out pretty naturally. So with me, whenever I draw a character that has a full mask on, like Spawn or Spider-Man or anybody else, I usually like to keep the head itself pretty narrow, especially around the chin area, because I don't think it looks really good if you give them like a really chiseled Roman-esque style facial features like that, because they're wearing a mask. So that whole mask is supposed to basically cover their identity and everything else. It's supposed to be hard for people to look at them and get a read on them, So when you see multiple characters like on different references for like online and or like right here comics, you'll see there's always a common trend where people take their own interpretation of a character. Will keep the certain aspects of how the head looks, how the face looks, and everything else into consideration, and then just add on details. And that's the nice thing about it. So once you have a good feel of everything like that, it's always better just to keep them that way. So, and right now, when I'm doing this rough sketch, I don't necessarily try to make a whole lot of details. As you can tell, as I'm going darker, I'm not going super dark like you would a color pencil like that, because going that dark right there is going to throw your whole drawing off, just because, for one, you really can't, as I said before, when I did Domino, you really can't hide blemishes on certain spots if you go too dark. And that's what you don't want to do. You don't want to keep your stuff dark. You want to keep it pretty light, enough where you can see it, and then start adding in the small details. So when it comes to the little cross hatching for the little crosshair area for the faces where the eyes are going to be at, it's okay to go a little dark too as well, but at the same time, you don't want to go too crazy with that. So when it comes to this neck area and everything else, again, you want to go pretty light when it comes to these small parts. Add in a little details here and there. And the whole point of doing these very quick lines is just to get an idea first on what and how you want to make the character look like. That's what it comes down to. It doesn't come down to the idea of trying to make everything look perfect at one point. It's like I said, when I was doing Domino, well, when I showed you the after pictures of Domino, you know, if you focus too much detail on, let's say, just the face first, and you're going to start seeing that a lot of it's going to suffer. And you'll start seeing that your lines afterwards, I'm like, wait, see, you guys wasn't here because I don't like the way that turned out. You're going to see a lot of your lines afterwards are going to be very, very, very unrefined, because obviously you're going to get mentally fatigued of just looking at this picture for hours on end. And there's days I've done that too. I've done it where I've seen this character for X amount of time. We'll get this out of the way. And I just get bored of looking at it. And you get tired, and then you just start rushing through the stuff. And that usually happens to me when I start doing the inking. That's when I get bored. Not because it's not fun to ink. It's just more of like, okay, well, I've been looking at this thing for 16 hours straight now, or how many other hours, and it's just getting tiring to look at it. Like I just don't want to. I want to be done with it. I want to get it out of the way and go on to the next project. All right. So now we have the small bases of that. As you can see, this is a little bit smaller spot of spawn. When it comes to adding in smaller details like his cape, it's always nice to do it very light, because again, you'll start seeing things go a little different. And so whenever you're doing add-ons, as you can tell, it's a little light. I know you can't see it that well. And the reason why I keep it that way is because, I'll make it a little dark for you guys, hold on. Is because you want everything to make sure it looks good. That's what it comes down to. And it's always nice to always do small things like that. Just make it a little bit more prettier, make it a little more connective, so that way you have a better idea of how you're going to make your character look. So, as you can tell right there, made it a little bit darker for you guys to look at. Now, when it comes to making sure everything looks even and connected, there's nothing wrong with drawing through the character. Because obviously at the end of the day, or not the end of the day, but at the end of the picture, you're going to erase this anyways. So, and obviously you're gonna erase all these lines before you even get to inking. So we'll take care of that afterwards. When you're doing that one, make sure everything does look a little more uniformed. Pull it right there, and we're gonna bring this in a little bit, and we're gonna exaggerate it right here. And same thing. And the nice thing about drawing Spawn, especially his cape, and if you look at different references on his cape and different interpretations of it, the coolest thing about it is that it's never even to the point where it looks too perfect, like he's wearing a like he's wearing something that's of, like, I guess, noble prestige looks. It's always pretty raw, pretty basic, and it's always flowing. So again, right now it's just the basic detailed work, not the detailed work, but the basic work of just getting the organic feel for this character. It's not about getting every small detail right first and then going back and fixing it. So, because you can fix it along the way as much as you'd like, as long as you still have that same idea, as long as it still looks good and you're still able to make a sense of it. There's nothing wrong with going a little bit more. So even right here, when it comes to the cape area, add a little something here. Nothing too crazy, just little lines like that, like showing that it's around the shoulders. So, and these right here obviously are not set in stone. So that's a nice thing about using pencils first and kind of having a good idea, because everything you draw isn't going to be, one for one what you're doing right now, obviously. Okay, so the next thing I do is I start with the face, obviously. So the first thing I like to do, and most other people who I've seen draw, they usually start with the eyes first, because as we all know, eyes are the gateway to the soul, right? So it's always nice to get a good feeling on how you want the face to look and how you're going to make everything flow together. So the first thing you can always do is that, since the first thing I like to do when it comes to working with a character like Spawn or Spider-Man or anybody who has like this, like I said, this full headed mask, is I like to start with the outline of the mask itself. So when you start to draw someone like Spider-Man, you know, it's always good to start out really big. Obviously, I'm going to erase this, you know, and, you know, go for somewhere like that. You know, so that is something like, now if I did something like that for Spider-Man, right? So it's always good to start something like that with Spider-Man. You know, it's pretty simple, pretty neat. And then that way it covers more space. So it's obviously not drawing Spotty, but they do have the same kind of concept. It's a lot easier to do it that way. So whatever helps you find a different reference, helps you remember how to do that, and you can start figuring out and play around. You know, I suggest, you know, always do that. It's always fun to do that one, because then you get a better feel for these characters. So start like that first. Obviously, I'm going to do a little bit of a Spider-Man thing, since Spawn and Spider-Man have basically the same kind of outlook, and keep it simple. And then with the eyes, we'll do something, you know, nothing too crazy right now. Eyes are always the hardest, not so much the hardest ones to do, but it's always the hardest ones to, not so much hard to do, yeah. Those are the easiest things to do, is just making them look right for every character, I should say. So sorry for that stuttering for a minute. I have that naturally, if anybody who knows me. But the nice thing about drawing eyes first is, especially when they don't have any pupils or irises you need to worry about, is that you can over exaggerate these eyelet holes that really are a lot of reminiscence of Domino Mask. And if anybody knows what Domino Mask are, they're like Robin from the Batman series wears and everything else. So there we go. We can just keep it like that. And whenever you draw these kind of masks, it's always kind of nice too to keep everything nice and sharp, just so that way you're telling the story of how they feel with the muscles around the eyes and around the cheeks and the eyes and the eyebrows. So obviously making them look a little angry and whatnot. And we'll go back in and we'll fix that later on in a minute. So when we start doing that one, this is where, so after we get let me get this darker. So after we get the eyes done, or at least the eye area done, and if we're doing the mouth too, that's when, you know, I'd go in there and start drawing everything else too for the nose and mouth and cheeks and whatnot. That's when I start working on the outside towards doing the, doing the head. So that's when I started getting more refined. So that's when you can start connecting the lines, the rough lines, making them nice little pretty ones. So right here, whenever you have certain lines that go with a facial expression from the eye, especially with a character that you can't see his whole face, it's always good to keep in mind where these lines are going to connect. So obviously this line I'm working on right now is Spawn's eyebrow, right? And so it's always good to make sure the outside of the eyebrow is going to connect with the inside of the face, obviously, right? So we do that, and this is where I can start putting in the ideas of making the head rounder or a little more sharper than I originally started with. Or if we're looking at this one too, if I want to bring down the chin a little bit, I can do that as well. You know, there's multiple things you can do when you're working with a pencil. You know, it's easier that way for me, and it's more gratifying, just because obviously what you're working with, you're keeping everything pretty loosey goosey, you know, and you have a better you have a better look of it because you have that really nice in-depth look. You know, your eyes are not being fatigued from looking at a computer screen, you know, or anything like that. So we'll bring his chin down a little bit right here, as you can tell, you know, and then we'll bring right here around. And this is when I do start making lines a little bit darker. And the reason why is because I don't like to erase anything a lot until I have a good solid base of what I'm going to work with. when I start putting into paper. So, and you'll see what I mean afterwards, because whenever I am drawing, obviously, sorry, before I get back to saying my spiel. So sorry for the, like I said, sorry for the crappy footage. Like, I'm focused on getting everything drawn out here, and yet I'm not even moving the camera up while I'm doing it. So I apologize for that one. All right. So again, so whenever you're putting ink to paper, you'll see, you can erase things before you actually start putting in a lot of detail. So like right here, that looks way too squared off. So I'm gonna bring this in a little bit. And like I said, I don't try to make a whole lot of erase marks, because then when you start doing that, you start seeing that, you start getting too focused on everything, and then you start freaking out like, well, this doesn't, match up, so this has to come back in, this has to do that, and that's the nice thing about working with pencils, is because the more details you add in afterwards, the better it will be, just because then you're more focused with it. So, and this time around, we're about 21 minutes now. So my whole thing with this is that I try to add as much detail as I can in a short amount of time. So this is the first round of details, really. So my first round of details usually take me about, I will say around 30 minutes, give or take, And I don't necessarily include the time that I take to look for a good reference or have an idea of who I want to draw. It's more along the lines of, if I have a good idea of who I'm going to draw and everything else, and have how they'll make them look, then that's when I start going into details. So, and with someone like Spawn, it's always fun to draw, because you can start very simple on the mask part, the white part of his mask, and you can just go to town on details. Right now, I'm keeping it pretty simple, like the 90s reference of Spawn. Just a very sharp lines. Very very 90s, very remnants of the time for the 90s when he was first created. So I keep everything pretty sharp. I draw sharp anyways. And, drawing characters like these are awesome, just because, I don't have to put a whole lot of detail into the outline of it, but I can add a lot of detail afterwards when it comes into drawing. I'll get a better angle. When it comes into drawing in the real large negative spaces on that one. So, and the cool thing also is when you're drawing someone like this, you can change small things to make them a little more intimidating, or a little more vocal, if you want to, so to speak. All right. So we'll start working on the neck a little bit. I'm not too happy on how I made this part of the cape look, because it's way too far out. So I'm going to bring that one in, and what I may start working on is the other side of the cape. So, and again, the cape is what you make of it. You can make it as flowy as you want, or as sharp as you want. It just really all depends. So I'm going to bring it in a little bit more. So I'll erase that, because I don't like that line. It does look kind of crummy. So we'll get that out of the way. And for me, I usually like to start from the top to bottom and just make it go from there. Because it's the nice thing about it is when, here we go, change it around. Now we'll go back to that way. So the nice thing about it is when you do someone like Spawn, it's pretty simple, especially when it comes to this cape, because you can just kind of make this go all over the place, But the thing is, though, is that you want to make it still have a very aesthetic looks to it, very pleasant to look. So since I didn't like the way this line came out and it was a little too far, I will easily go back in and I'll make this line a little bit darker, so that way I don't confuse myself on what I'm working on. So we'll bring this up high, a little bit higher. And again, I'm keeping it very, very reminiscent of how he usually looks from the older comics and everything else. So we'll go from right there. And right here, this is where I can start thinking, okay, you know, how wide I want to go, how how I want to go, and it doesn't really matter really, and just kind of keep it right there. So that's the nice thing about drawing Spawn's kit, because it's really is this, if you know the mythos, it's its own, the whole suit of Spawn, it's its own thing, it's its own entity. So I kind of feel like, you know, the way you draw the cape itself, it's like, you know, its own character. It's just like the symbiote suit from with Venom. It's its own character. It's just this really over the top thing, you know. So, and then this nice little folded parts, we'll make those a little darker because I do like how those were turning out. So we'll make it a little darker, make them a little sharp, add a little point right here. Same thing. Don't worry about adding too much detail. Just get the nice feel for it first and then go from there. So, and same thing, you always want to just keep it nice and keep it flowing. There's nothing wrong with starting anew if you have to with the character. You can always, well, not so starting anew like starting a whole new picture, but it's always, there's nothing wrong with going back and redoing your work if you weren't satisfied with it. So all right, so I'll make this a little bit wider on top there, and we'll make this a little more pointed. So yeah, same thing every time you're doing your line work and you're doing your second round of, you know, what I like to call the detailed work. It's always nice to keep everything a little bit more loosey goosey, you know. We'll keep everything nice and there. And don't erase any lines, because eventually you'll see what I mean when you do the ink. You'll start seeing that a lot of things look pretty cool. All these random lines that you made look a lot better when you just leave them there and you ink them over, because then it gives more of that really nice comic book look to the character. So there's nothing wrong with keeping those in there, you know. Obviously, I made it a little bit too high, so I can't really make that cape connect, but that's nothing wrong with that one. We have plenty of negative space that we can work with, and I have a pretty good idea of what I'm going to do with that in a minute. So, and you'll see that. So, and before we start on the other cape and get that a little more even and give it a nice little pointed feel, we'll come up here. We'll make some lines right there. And I'm going to bring this side right here out, so that way, not so much up there, that's a little too, so I'm going to bring this side in a little bit, keep that line, I'll make that line a little bit darker, so that way I know where I'm at. Make that there, put this right here, and I'll just erase that line for now, just because same thing, don't want to get too confused on where you're at, because, you know, certain lines won't do anything for you if they're just there just to fill in space, and there's nothing wrong with taking them out when you need to. So we'll do that, make everything else a little more jagged. I'll bring this up higher, you know, so that way it has a nice little layers to it right there. Get that one out, because it's the same thing, it just fills up a lot of space for a whole lot of nothing. Don't like the way that looks. And then we'll bring this right here, looks a little better. Bring that one, same thing, but nothing wrong with little jagged edges everywhere. We'll bring this right here, and there we go. See, look at that, just like that. You can easily fix everything, just as long as you have your basic lines made up, and that way you can build off from them. You can build off, you can raise, you can bring in, you can take out, and it's always good to have those kind of deals. So, and like right here, just to make it a little more matching with that, obviously, you know, same thing, just kind of keep all the lines perfectly, not so much perfectly, but keep them pretty cleaned up as much as you can to keep it a little more leveled out, so to speak. All right, so, and then we'll go over here. Same thing, just keep the parts that are on the that are on his shoulders a little more jagged. You don't necessarily want to make both of these match. You want to make the cape or any other part of any figure you draw a little even, but when it comes to drawing like material that's laying flat, if you look at anything like your jeans or a sweater, or like maybe like say you put a blanket over your shoulders, you notice that there's always little lines everywhere. So you never want to make them evened out, because then it just looks, it really is kind of distracting, because then you start noticing like, well, I mean, naturally things don't do that, you know, when you in real life, you know. So you always want to take good references and have a good idea of how you want to make it look. And the nice thing about drawing things like that is that you don't necessarily even have to make them look even, I guess, anatomically correct. You just kind of make them look however you want. All right. So we're gonna go down to here. We're gonna draw a couple loose circles. I'll do one right here. That. And then we'll make a cross for the eyelets on that one. Then I'll make another circle right here, make it a little bit smaller. And same thing, do a little cross right here, make a little exaggerated look. So there, and then we'll do a nice little line like that. And this is gonna be part of Spawn's chains on his chest, which is kind of cool. So again, even if you're drawing a symbol that has like a human feature, same thing. It's always good just to keep them pretty even as you can. You know, you don't necessarily have to be anatomically correct on them or anything like that, but at least you want to show that there is some kind of real flow to it and real natural look, not just, oh hey, well, you know, I'm just drawing skulls, I don't have to make them look anyway, you know, sort of stuff. You know, you still want whatever you draw, like, that's simple, to match what's bigger. So that's what you want to do. So, and drawing his skulls on his cape are pretty easy, you know, just a simple 3 lines, a rectangle pretty much, and, you know, the half circle of the head. All right, we'll keep that line right there. So I'm not going too crazy on them right now on the details on that one, just because, same thing, I want to keep it pretty simple for right now, because this is the first round of detail work. So, and when I draw something that has like a skull shape to it and I want to keep it pretty even, I don't necessarily